Hey, everybody. Welcome to the manual. I'm Dan Gaul, and today our guest is Tariq Nasheed. Tariq is an acclaimed author, filmmaker, and social commentator known for his impactful work on hidden histories and socio-political issues. He's here to talk about his latest documentary, Microphone Check, which delves into the authentic roots of hip hop, featuring pioneers of hip hop, breakdance, graffiti, and more, like Coke La Rock, Melly Mel, and Grandmaster Caz. Tariq brings together the originators to share their firsthand stories. Join us as we uncover the true history of these cultural movements through Tariq's unique lens. Welcome, Tariq. How you doing?
I'm great, man. Thank you. A pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me as well. I watched Microphone Check last night, and man, was that an education. There was so much going on that I had no idea about. The true kind of hip hop foundations, the starts, the kind of like information that you go into from like the myths around Jamaica or Jamaican roots of it, the Latin influence on it, etc. So, like, could you kind of start giving us some an idea of around the inspiration of this, where these myths came from, and why you wanted to create this documentary?
Now, I've done a lot of documentaries on history, especially untold Black history. That's kind of my niche. I had something called the Hidden Colors series. I did 5 volumes of Hidden Colors, which was wildly successful and very popular about hidden Black history. So I'm a historian, and I like to uncover a lot of things that's not told. Plus, I'm an avid hip hop fan. I'm a real big fan of hip hop culture, and I've been a big fan since I was a child. And when the 50th anniversary of hip hop started to come around, we started to see a revision of history. Now, I'm somebody who's been in the culture for a very long time, since the 80s. So I've studied the culture, I've been a fan of it, I've lived the culture. And to see the revision of it, that made me raise my antennas and say, hey, okay, we got to chill out with all of these revisions. And why are they trying to revise the culture? Why are they trying to revise the origin of what was what? And around the 50th anniversary of hip hop, we kept hearing these narratives about how hip hop came from African culture, Caribbean culture, Latino culture, but foundational Black American culture is often overlooked. It's often ignored, and that's where hip hop came from. So I wanted to tell the truth about the history and really pay homage to some of those pioneers who are still around, and people are ignoring them, and they want to tell their story. So I put it together, and we just made it happen.
It's really interesting because, like, for me, in my perception, I always thought hip hop originated out of New York, out of the Bronx. Like, I didn't realize that there was this kind of revision happening, or those efforts were happening. And during the course of the film, that thought, like what you just said about like recording history, recording the facts, and making sure that we have that available to us moving forward in the future. That
Mhm.
I got that concept throughout the film, and I appreciated that a lot, because that's what I was thinking. Is like, when hip hop was created from this in the '60s, early '70s, to me, I was born in the '70s. I feel like that wasn't that long ago, but now that when you think about it, like, it is a long time ago, and the people that were involved in the creation of hip hop, involved in b-boy culture, in graffiti, we are at risk of losing those folks without hearing their voice and their stories. And that to me is always a big deal. Getting people's stories and living that experience through their lens, right? So how has the process of this impacted you in your outlook in your current life and that history?
Getting these pioneers to tell their story, man, that's big for me. And I've learned some extra stuff from them. One thing in particular, we talked about this in the film, that there was a difference between the disco DJs and the hip hop DJs.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of disco DJs in the 70s who would rap, but they were still not quite considered hip hop because they didn't really involve the totality of hip hop, meaning the rapping, the mixing, the b-boying, the graffiti, the whole thing. So there was a little internal battle about that. and we covered that in the film. But it's very interesting that a lot of these pioneers who actually created things from the very beginning, they've been often underrepresented. In the film, we have the first hip hop breakdancer, Trixie. We have him in the film. We have the first female MC, which is Sha-Rock. She's in the film. The first person who created modern graffiti, Cornbread out of Philadelphia, he's in the film. So a lot of these pioneers, they've been underrepresented, because when a lot of documentaries go into hip hop, what they'll do, because many of these documentaries are funded by the corporate structure, and the corporate structure, they have record labels and they want to promote their artists. So they'll talk about the Kool Herc party in 73, then they'll skip to the 90s or something like that and start talking about rappers who are more current, so they can kind of push that agenda. And I wanted to focus on the 70s. And if you see the film, most of what we talk about happens in the 70s and before. We don't really get in the 80s because in the 80s, hip hop is established. And most of the stuff that happened in the 80s, that's pretty well documented. But the fuzzy gray area that's been uncharted for so long was what happened after that party in 73 and what happened before that party in 73. Nobody ever likes to talk about that. And that's what we do in this film.
Can you kind of dig into the party? Like, there was the reference to the party and being on a 3x5 card, and who was originally on that card, and like remind me of the woman's name. She's on the card, but nobody has any information about her, etc. But can you give me the significance of this party, the before and after?
Right. That first party that happened in 73 with Kool Herc, a lot of people question the validity of what happened at that party. Now, the party did happen, but because it's been so mythologized, you have everybody and their mother claiming that they were at that party. And as we talk about in the film, people who have actually been to Sedgwick, that's a very small room. It can only fit, less than 100 people. So all of those people could not have been there. And there are people who's on that flyer who weren't there. They verified that they weren't there. That flyer that we see circulate, that came after. They just kind of made that after the fact. So we're clearing up a lot of the rumors and things like that revolving that party and the origin of hip hop. Also, we talked about how Kool Herc even said that he went to another party and he saw other DJs playing break records. So all of that stuff is talked about in the film.
Yeah, and also how you all go into like break beats. I mean, honestly, I love the fact that you cover a lot. Like, there's a lot to cover, but it's very diverse, right? You talk about break beats. You talk about the origin of like break beats, where it was coming from. You talk about the b-boys and graffiti. I just love the fact that it was kind of like all encapsulating. It wasn't just about hip hop music, but the influence of other phenomenon that was happening around that time or even prior to this first party, and how it was influencing the young kids that were really the pioneers of hip hop, and also the difference between, like you mentioned, the disco DJ and the hip hop DJ, right?
Yeah.
So like, where could this have gone, right? Like, if you're talking about if these kids that were rhyming over these break beats, etc., and you had the disco DJ, you had some other like competitive like parties, some were exclusive, and it makes a lot of sense where this was kind of originating from. But what are some possibilities that could have happened if certain events didn't transpire?
Yeah, I think that if certain things didn't happen, if the youth didn't really facilitate a lot of things, because that was very important, that the youth got their version of what they were doing on the radio, where you had some of those personality DJs rapping over records before the record went into the musical part. And the kids would see that, and they would do that at the parties, the block parties. You had people like Eddie Chiba, the disco DJs like DJ Hollywood, who would rap like the radio DJs, but they wouldn't really rap over a break beat per se. They'll just rap over the beginning of a record or the end of a record. They weren't going back and forth. So a lot of the hip hop DJs, they caught a break and they kept the break beat going so that there could be a flow of constant rhyming over records. So I think if you didn't have the kids facilitating the culture and what was going on, it might have just been a trend. It might have kind of fizzled out like disco, because disco fizzled out. But those kids, they took it and did something unique with it. The first rap record or hip hop record, Rapper's Delight, if you listen to Rapper's Delight, and a lot of people notice this, the cadence was more of a DJ Hollywood flavor, which actually worked because DJ Hollywood had the radio DJ cadence and baritone voice, and that was more susceptible for the general public to absorb than a more hardcore rapper rapping over a hard break beat. So we talk about those dichotomies in the film.
Yeah, and then Sha-Rock also mentioned about that difference with DJ Hollywood and how he rapped and how he influenced her, but like that baritone style, like her
Yeah.
style was completely different, right? So how were the female MCs influential to hip hop back in those early days?
Sha-Rock, who's so very important, not only is the first female MC of hip hop, Sha-Rock actually changed the cadence of hip hop. So the way people rap now comes directly from her because she didn't have the baritone voice like all the other rappers had. In that era, the mid 70s, late 70s, everybody was like, throw your hands in the air and everybody run around the bear. That was the style. Because she didn't have a deep voice, she had to rap in her normal voice and it flowed better. And other people emulated that. So her crew, the Funky 4+1 More, they never rapped in that baritone voice either. So they had more of a natural cadence that's utilized in more hip hop records now. So but we underestimate how important people like her were to the culture.
Yeah, I loved actually hearing that part of in the documentary because I feel like in traditional kind of you know, things that get done, movements that get started, etc. Like the female representation tends to be a little bit lesser.
Right.
So to feel like the impact that Sha-Rock and the other female MCs and how also it was definitive, right? Like I am the first female MC, right? Like that definitive like voice was
Yes.
actually really I thought that was pretty amazing to hear and see.
Right. And what made Sha-Rock stand out was that she was better than most guys. I mean, she could really, really rap, and she had voice control that was insane. So she had to go against the big dogs, and that sustained her and really maintained her legacy in the game.
I love that she represented, which was an amazing thing.
Yeah.
What about like early days of music? So like when I had never heard of Pigmeat Markham, as soon as I heard that beat, I was dancing in my seat. I was like, this is I like I could listen to this today. Like a record could come out today with that beat and like do
You can
well.
blend it in. Yeah, you can blend it in with a hip hop record now. Now, what you're referencing is one record called "Here Comes the Judge" by Pigmeat Markham, came out in 1967, and 67, this is the year when funk was really being cultivated. James Brown had Cold Sweat out at the time, which is one of the first funk records and one of the first records to have a funk break beat on it. And Pigmeat Markham was rapping over a funk drum beat and rapping in 16-bar cadences like they do now. There was another record he did in 1969 called "Who Got the Number," where he and another guy, they're actually rapping and trading bars.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of early hip hop pioneers, they were influenced by the Pigmeat Markhams and people like that. Because at the time, you had a lot of, our parents had comedy records. They had Pigmeat, Red Fox, Dolomite. So we would hear these little snappy, witty rhymes in records coming out of the 60s. Plus, we had Muhammad Ali at the time, who was rhyming. So that was the thing in our culture. So they just took that and just brought it to the streets.
So for those like myself who aren't familiar with like those comedy records and the comparison between like early days of hip hop, what like when I listen to that song by Pygmy, like it sounds like rap.
Yeah.
And I so like what really is the distinction from saying like, hey, those are like that's actually rap, that's like hip hop versus like what the kids were doing later.
Yeah. Yeah. So when Pygmy did it, there wasn't a name for it yet. He was just rhyming over records. And there are other records even before that, not because funk wasn't created, but they were rapping over beats, not funk beats, because funk wasn't created yet. We played a video of a group called the Jubilaires from the 1940s where they're rapping over a record. So we've always rhymed over records, or over, not over records, but over beats. In foundational Black American culture, we had something called ham bone, where we would play the drums with our bodies and do rhymes. Ham bone, have you heard? Mama gonna buy you a mockingbird. So that was part of our culture, to do these witty rhymes over beats. So we just took that from the culture and put it on wax.
I find that history of music really interesting because even for me, and I don't remember the name of the documentary that I watched, but it was about like Mississippi Delta blues
Mm-hmm.
and how you had individuals back in like the early 1900s, like just going from small little towns and singing roadside or in bars, etc. I remember when I heard some of the songs from there, that era, it was also very similar to me, like they were rhyming and
Yeah.
rapping on top of them just playing a guitar, solo guitar, right? And it's just kind of interesting that the history around this and where it's evolved. How long have you been working on the documentary, and what are some of the challenges or obstacles you had to overcome?
Yeah, we've been working on the film for a little under a year. We were grinding real hard on it, and it was a fun process just being around those pioneers. The only challenge I would say, if there we could say there was a challenge, I did want to get some Latino voices in there because of that whole thing where they're saying that Latinos and Blacks created at 50-50. I would have liked to talk to some Latino cats to get their perspective, but a lot of people just weren't open to come on. And truth be told, there weren't any Latino pioneers to bring on. The Latino brothers and sisters, they came way, way later. And a lot of folks don't like to admit that. And that's what we talked about in the film. Because if you say that there are these pioneers who created it 50-50, I can show you the foundational Black American ones. I can even show you a couple of the Caribbean brothers like Herc and Flash. And that's another thing, Grandmaster Flash. We were corresponding. I wanted him to be in the film, and he was open, but his schedule, we didn't get the scheduling thing together. But a lot of respect to him. But yeah, I did want to get some Latino voices in there, but I think we told a pretty good story so far.
Yeah. Why do you why do you think there's these narratives around like the Latino 50-50 with this, and how has that come about?
You know what? In our culture, man, whenever we create a genre and that genre starts to look like something positive, there's been a need to take it away from us and give credit to other people.
Mhm.
Now, when hip hop was negative, when it was looked at as a negative thing and degenerates and a bunch of criminals and they're scratching up records and this is noise, it was all Black. Nobody wanted to share that with us. When people were getting indicted and those censorship charges and people were going to jail for hip hop, it was all Black. Now that it's going to the Olympics, now there's the big corporate push for hip hop. Now everybody wants to claim part of the origin story. And that happens with a lot of our genres. That has happened with rock and roll, which was a foundation of Black American culture. And when rock and roll started, it was devil music. You had people protesting it. It was the worst thing ever. It turned society into degenerates. Same thing with jazz. They said jazz was devil music. Those Blacks are turning people into weed smoking junkies. And once it became commercially viable, rock and roll and jazz, it was taken out of our hands to a certain degree. So they've always done that with the genres we create. And we're saying, no, 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 we're going to gatekeep it and let people know where it came from. Everybody can enjoy it. Everybody can participate, but we got to respect where it came from. And that's foundational Black American culture.
Yeah, remembering the history, right? And especially, the older some of these things are, like that the history can be distorted, right? And memory is a little bit faded.
Right, right. And we had the people in the movie, man. We had Trixie in the movie. Trixie is the first hip hop break dancer. This guy was the first person to break dance over break beats. He's still alive. And break dancing is going to the Olympics. We need to know the origin of this stuff and let's tell the truth about it. And that's what we're doing in the film.
Yeah, again, I'd never heard of Trixie, and to be honest, when you think, uh, this is why I love the fact that you brought in breakdancing and graffiti. Is, I mean, of course, when you're talking about it, it makes sense, right? Like, of course, graffiti, breakdancing is part of that culture, but I didn't think about it in the past. Like, you kind of like opened my eyes to that. And having Trixie be part of that and Cornbread, like. Those how were they? How did they influence those pioneers of hip hop back then? I do believe like graffiti, like what Cornbread was doing was before even that party, right?
Right, right.
But what Trixie did came from the music, right? So like how did it help hip hop evolve? How did hip hop help those activities evolve as well?
Yeah. So yeah, the break-in that came from like in the 1960s when funk records were about. Funk records usually had a breakdown. And the breakdown part, people would dance harder. You would really show off your moves. You would hit the floor and do flips and acrobatics and then jump back up. So that was the thing, to hit the floor on the get down part. If you look at old images or old video of James Brown, when there was a break or he went to the bridge, James would hit the floor. If you look at old episodes of Soul Train, if there was a funky beat, everybody would hit the floor on the get down part. So Trixie took that dynamic and took that to the parties. And when some of the DJs would get to the break of the record, Trixie would hit the floor. So the DJs would say, hey, let me extend this break so they can stay on the floor and do these moves. So things are starting to evolve from that. And since they're breaking on the floor and there is no music over the beat, let's have somebody rap over the beat to kind of put some flavor on it, to kind of hype up the dancer. And then how the graffiti came into play. It came from our brother Cornbread out of Philly. There was a big graffiti movement in the 60s out of Philly. A guy named Top Cat took it out of Philly, brought it to New York. And a lot of the early B-boys and a lot of the early DJs, many of them were graffiti artists, and they would use their graffiti skills to make flyers. So that's how hip hop and graffiti got tied in with each other.
I loved Cornbread's story, by the way, of when he was in I think it was like juvenile detention, right? And he would tear it up in there is I think what the words he used, and to the point where they were like, you know what, this is art, and they gave him an outlet for it. And then when he got out, he just went to town. That
Yes.
nobody else was doing that, like writing their names, tagging on different structures, different areas, etc. To me, again, kind of mind blowing.
Yeah, and the way he did it, because see, people they wrote on walls in their neighborhoods before, like, hey, Jimmy was here, whatever. But the way Cornbread did it, he made it an art form where you turn the entire city into your canvas, which inspired other people to do it. So he turned it into an art movement. That was the unique thing about Cornbread. And then that inspired the Taki 183s and some of those early New York guys who got a lot of international notoriety. But the first articles about graffiti artists came out of Philly with Cornbread and those guys.
And there was it's a positive spin again out of that story, which if you took it from a surface level looks more like a negative spin, right? Or, a negative thing happening. But, if you think about cultural impact, art, and, again, Cornbread, it's his voice, right? Like it's his ability to have an impact on society. And look at where it's gone nowadays. It's inspired so many people in various genres of that art as well, I would say.
Indeed. Yes,
Um, can can you share any like specific memories or experiences or learnings from doing this film, doing the research that could inspire others?
yeah, there's so much to unpack in the film, man. We talked about so much. About one thing that I learned where the whole sound system culture that was already bubbling in New York. They had DJ crews out of Queens, you had DJ crews out of Brooklyn, and some of the Bronx DJs were actually inspired by those guys. So a lot of elements from hip hop came from other places within Black culture. They got the seeds from all of these different areas, but everything was cultivated and meshed together and birthed in the Bronx. And just us talking about where the early pioneers originated from, because many of them came from the South and their Southern background, that was important too, because, their parents had funk records, they come from soul and gospel backgrounds. So that was very influential. And they were listening to poets like Nina Simone and people like that. So people were they were getting these influences from their Southern families.
Yeah, I saw like a lot from South Carolina and North Carolina, and then as their families moved up into the like New York City, et cetera, that's where you know, that origin story again, really interesting, and again makes sense because how important music was in history in general, just coming out of the South, right?
Yes, indeed. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, if you had a message to some of the kids today who might watch this film, right, and admire what you're doing, how they can follow in your footsteps, what is some advice you can give some kids?
I would say, look, if you want to participate in hip hop and be a fan of it, just respect the culture, man. You respect this culture, and it's all about paying homage and respect to anything that you engage in. And that's what we're doing with hip hop. If you're a fan of something, you have to respect the origin of it. So I say, if you are a fan of hip hop, watch this film. This film is definitely for you. This is the definitive film on the history of hip hop. A lot of information in this film has never been heard before, and it will give you a newfound appreciation for the culture. So just watch it and educate others about it, and show respect to it, and that's going to help it grow and be more cultivated and more worldly.
Right. And then what's next for you? Are you working on more hip hop history kind of documentaries
So
or?
I want to do a West Coast version of Microphone Check, because
Mm,
the West Coast history is just as interesting. There's a lot of stuff that's not talked about as far as West Coast history and the influence of the hip hop genres out here, and how Soul Train and a lot of the pop locking dances came out of the West Coast. So I think that's another story that needs to be told as well.
yeah, you ever thought about also doing from a different timing perspective? So like again, for me, I I grew up a skateboarder, right? And like the counterculture of skateboarding, and when I was growing up, it was merged together with punk rock and gangster rap. It's such a weird combination, but it's something that was embedded into the history of skateboarding back when I was growing up. So like I think about mine. I mean, obviously that stuff came along way after the foundation of hip hop on the West Coast. It'd be interesting to see the origin stories of some of those. I know there's been some stories around that, but again, like my eyes were kind of opened up by this documentary about a lot of information I had no idea, and people I didn't know anything about either. So it was really refreshing.
That's interesting, because a lot of the punk rockers, some of the white punk rock guys, they were some of the early fans of hip hop as well, because in the 70s, the late 70s, the punk rock movement was being cultivated, and Bambaataa and those guys were playing at some of those punk clubs. You had groups like Blondie, who, kind of had a punkish thing going on, who did one of the first rap records, the Rapture record. Then you had
Mhm.
the Beastie Boys, who they were kind of a punk group at first, and then they kind of meshed it in a little bit later and did their thing. So, there's some correlations there with the cultivation of hip hop and how it influenced punk, and how vice versa. So all of that stuff is relative.
Yeah, I'd love to see a Southern origin story as well. I love Southern hip hop. So, um, well, to summarize, like there's a lot going on in here. I want to make sure we get some last information from you about the release of this movie. I got some dates from you that like basically the the viewings and everything else happening are all going on this week as of us recording today. Like when this video comes out, it might be, maybe after these have all premiered. But can you give us a little update on that?
Yeah, Memorial Day weekend, the movie's going to be in select theaters around the country, which is phenomenal. We've got a lot of sold out showings already. And then we're going to have the Blu-ray of the film out, immediately available. That's going to be probably in a couple of weeks. They can get it at microphonecheck.com. Also, it will stream on our streaming service called fbastream.com, and they'll be able to get the Blu-ray on Amazon. So it will be available to the public.
Amazing. Well, I really appreciate the work that you're doing here. Again, I learned a lot from this. I felt like I was educated in such a like an amazing way. It gave me things to look up and be curious about, which to me means that it was worthwhile as well. So thank you so much.
I
Appreciate
appreciate
your
it.
time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.